Chapter 1. What is Black History? Introduction. What is Black history? Malcolm X, Mary Siegel, slavery, clanic societies, the man who invented the traffic lights? Clearly, the history of Black people dates back to the period well before they were enslaved and colonized. That there is such a history worth discussing was well stated many years ago by Professor William Hansberry, the venerable African-American historian. In a lecture entitled Early African Civilizations, he informed us that between the years 1834 and 1908, there occurred a revolution in academic thinking about Africa's place in the outlines of world geography and world history. And in the past 150 years, European explorers and archaeologists have found in the valleys of Niger, Benwezi, Limpopo, and Nile rivers, in the basin of Lake Chad and the Sahara, extensive remains of hundreds of ruins which bear witness to the existence of former civilizations hundreds and thousands of years ago. Professor Sheikh Anta Diop, the noted Senegalese scholar, expressed a similar view more recently. In Nubia, i.e. Sudan, we find a profusion of stone monuments such as obelisks, temples, pyramids. In Zimbabwe, i.e. Southern Africa, we find ruins of monuments and cities built of stone, over a radius of 100 to 200 miles around Victoria. In other words, those ruins extend over a diameter almost as great as that of France. In the region of ancient Ghana was the site of Kumbi, excavated by French district officer Bonnel de Mézières, who discovered tombs of great dimensions, sarcophagi of schist, metallurgical workshops, ruins of towers, and various buildings. In the Lake Debo region, in Mali on the Niger, pyramids are found. We have already discussed in the recent discovery of Eredo, archaeology has unearthed two other civilizations in the Nigeria region, Nok and Igbo Ukwu. Artifacts from the Nok culture were first stumbled upon in 1928 by tin miners who were digging in the region. Various dating techniques showed that the artifacts belonged to a civilization dated between 1000 BC and 300 BC. Iron smelting was conducted in the Nok culture from at least 900 BC. There is evidence of iron slag and also a blast furnace wall. Isaiah Nosey, a Nigerian gentleman, discovered the Igbo Ukwu culture in 1938. He unearthed a number of artifacts quite by accident when digging in his backyard. Archaeologists have since dated the Igbo Ukwu culture at 800 to 1000 AD. According to one writer, the Igbo Ukwu finds showed evidence of metalworking, weaving, and pottery making of unusual skill. The metalwork included 110 major and 575 minor copper and bronze objects of very high quality and very distinctive design. The Jos Museum in Nigeria and many other institutions continue to house the rediscovered artifacts, but our focus for this chapter is actually quite different. In Nigeria, great monuments of historical importance exist. The royal palace in the northern city of Dara is known to date to the medieval period. Professor Mohoski, an authority on Nigerian architecture, wrote, "It is reasonable to presume that most of the original plan of residence has not changed for several centuries." He continues, "The most impressive building within the palace complex was the Kofar Zar, the entrance hall. Its walls were extremely thick, up to 2.8 meters. The structure and the three-dimensional design were most imaginative and proved the proficiency of the builders in spatial composition. The roughly square interior was covered by a flat roof, supported by an elaborate system of 4 main corbelled arches. They were supplemented by a number of semi-elliptical consoles or cantilever beams, all reinforced with timber. The main arches, the Bazan Gizo, sprang from the 8 pillars. The 4 pillars standing on both sides of the main axis were square. The 4 along the transverse axis were round. All of them stood independently for only 1/3 of their height, and the upper 2/3 of each pillar joined with the walls of the kofar, thus forming an extremely powerful system of supports. It could be compared with the structural concept of flying buttresses, but set inside, rather than outside the building, and leaving a free passage along the walls all around the Kofar Zar. The passage could be compared with the ambulatory of medieval cathedral, to borrow once again from the vocabulary of European Gothic. This comparison, it must be emphasized, applies insofar as each problem was solved by similar thinking on the part of the designers. The structure, form, and purpose had no similarity to any European device." The royal palace in the city of Kano dates back to the 15th century, begun by Muhammad Ramfa, ruled 1463 to 99. It has gradually evolved over generations into a very imposing complex. A colonial report of the city from 1902 described it as a network of buildings covering an area of 33 acres and surrounded by a wall 20 to 30 feet high outside and 15 feet inside. In itself, no mean citadel. Furthermore, the southern gate of the first millennium Palace of Dala, the original capital, still exists today and is part of the Kano complex. The royal palace in the city of Zaria dates to the 16th century. Begun by Bakwa Turonku, died 1566. Though there is some doubt here, it too has evolved into a great complex. See page 93. Dr. Mahosky says of it, the palace should be preserved as one of the most important monuments of Nigerian national culture. There are old mosques and minarets that are still in existence. Of these, the most celebrated are the Gobaru Minaret of Muhammad Kora, ruled 1444 to 1494, and the Friday Mosque of Zaria. Malam Mikelu, the Babangwani great builder, built this latter construction between 1834 and 1846. Made of egg-shaped clay bricks, the building was surrounded by an enclosure that contained a court and an adjoining sanctuary. The sanctuary possesses 6 domes but bears no resemblance to those of Oriental buildings. Complexes of clay arches that were reinforced with corbels of palm beans spanned the spaces within. Reliefs decorated the supporting piers and parts of the Qibla wall. Professor Mutton, author of Hausa architecture, wrote, "The Friday Mosque Zaria is probably the high point of Hausa architecture built during a puritanical fervor. The relief patterns were sober and formal, the dignified work of religious reformers, the very antithesis of arabesque-like spirals, interlacing knots and chevrons typical of Hausa land for much of this, i.e. 20th century. The first impression of entering the mosque of the big sculptural forms. Decoration is restrained and in the background." North Africa. Egypt and other countries of North Africa are today considered integral parts of the Arab world. The Arabians have dominated North Africa since their victorious jihad of 639 to 708 AD. Before that conquest, however, North Africa was basically Negro, just like the rest of the African continent. The most ancient monuments in this region were built when North Africa was under indigenous African rule. Pharaoh Djoser, the second king of the third Egyptian dynasty, ruled between 5018 and 4989 BC. He built the earliest monument in the world still celebrated today. Every year, thousands of tourists visit the funerary complex in the city of Saqqara. Imhotep, his celebrated prime minister, designed the complex. An outer wall, now mostly in ruins, surrounded the whole structure. It was built on a rectangular plan, 1 mile long, with one entrance. See page 161. Through the entrance are a series of columns, the first stone-built columns known to historians. Connected to walls, there are ornamental having been modeled on plant stems grouped together. The north house also has ornamental columns built into the walls that have papyrus-like capitals. Also inside the complex is the ceremonial court. Like everything else, these buildings are solid and are thus symbolic. The court is made of limestone blocks that have been quarried and then shaped. In the center of the complex is the step pyramid, the first of the 90 Egyptian pyramids. Made of limestone blocks, it is 197 feet high. Unlike the later pyramids, the structure is built on a rectangular plan measuring 345 by 414 feet, equivalent to the base of 14,000 square yards. It has 6 steps and may represent a stairway. The building slopes at an angle of 72 degrees and 30 feet. Under the pyramid were a series of rock-hewn chambers and corridors. They are ornamented with panels of colorful tiles. In these hidden quarters, Djoser and 11 others are said to have been buried. On the importance of the Djoser complex, Dr. Charles Finch, a leading African-American scholar, noted that it was humanity's first great architectural triumph. It established architectural forms, styles, and canons still in use today. The practical building technique and masonry evident in the entrance temple were never surpassed, though. They were realized on a grander scale. The monuments on a grander scale include the structures built by the 4th dynasty pharaohs, the step pyramid of Midam, the bent and red pyramids of Dashur, and the 3 great pyramids of Giza. Monuments built between 4872 and 4615 BC. Of these, the most impressive is the first Great Pyramid of Giza. It was 481 feet tall, the equivalent of a 40-story building. It was made of 2.3 million blocks of limestone and granite, some weighing 100 tons. The accuracy of the construction work is astonishing. Dr. Alfred Russel Wallace, a famous British scientist, commented on this more than 100 years ago in an address before the British Association for the Advancement of Science. 1. That the pyramid is truly square, the sides being equal and the angles right angles. 2. That the 4 sockets on which the first 4 stones of the corners rested are truly on the same level. 3. That the directions of the sides are accurate to the 4 cardinal points of north, south, east, and west. 4. That the vertical height of the pyramid bears the same proportion to its circumference at the base as the radius of the circle does to its circumference, i.e., the Egyptians understood pi. Further south lay the complex of temples in the city of Waset. The Karnak and Luxor temples, now in partial ruin, were built over many years with contributions from different pharaohs of the 12th, 18th, 19th, and 25th dynasties, 3405 to 6664 BC. The Karnak complex was a place of culture and business. It should be thought of as an abbey since people lived and worked there, and the complex was self-contained. The treasures of the ancient world passed through its corridors. Gold and precious woods from Kush, tribute from Syria, and vases from Crete. A procession of sphinxes led to the outer pylon, itself 370 feet across, 143 feet high, and 49 feet thick at the base, but becoming narrower at the top. Behind the pylon was the Temple of Amun, which originally had huge doors to close it off. See page 193. A place of unbelievable luxury. The Hypostyle Hall, just one of the many temples, was 171 feet long and 338 feet wide, covering an area of 56,000 square feet. It was the largest enclosed space in the Egyptian architecture. Even larger than Durham Cathedral by 5,000 square feet. It contained 134 sandstone columns covered with bas-reliefs and hieroglyphics. An architect described the hall as follows. No language, says Ferguson, can convey an idea of its beauty, and no artist has yet been able to reproduce its form so as to convey to those who have not seen it any ideas of its grandeur. The mass of its central piers, illuminated by a flood of light from the clerestory, and the smaller pillars of the wings gradually fading into obscurity, are so arranged and lighted as to convey an idea of infinite space. At the same time, the beauty and the massiveness of its forms and its brilliancy of their color decorations all combine to stamp this as the greatest of man's architectural works. There were huge obelisks that stood before the facades of the Karnak and Luxor temples. They were made of single pieces of stone that were hewn from a quarry and then transported to the required position. Pharaoh Hatshepsut erected one such obelisk. It was 90.2 feet tall and weighed an astonishing 302 tons. There is a huge and unfinished obelisk that is 41.78 meters long that was left at Aswan, presumably because it did not meet exacting standards of accuracy. The importance of these monuments are such that one authority has argued that there is a typological and symbolic link between the obelisks of ancient times and the skyscrapers of today. As Eleh put it, several texts exist of pharaohs boasting that they erected obelisks which reached, pierced, or mingled with the sky. Pharaoh Hatshepsut, 1650 to 1600 BC, of the 18th dynasty, was a builder of one of Egypt's most popular monuments. Senenmut, the overseer of works, constructed her temple in the region now known as Deir el-Bahari. See page 81. Rather than build upwards from a base, the mortuary temple was built downwards, being cut out of a mountain. The whole building was hewn from the rocks by hammer and chisel. The result is a pillar terrace structure that rises in 3 stages with 2 central ramps, also carved and sculpted. The ramps are long and slope with a gentle gradient. Their position divides the temple into 2 symmetrical halves. Entrance halls of limestone columns led to the interior chapels dedicated to the deities Anubis, Hathor, Osiris, and Ra. Through the colonnade, the interior has wall reliefs that depict Hatshepsut's maritime voyages to Punt, i.e. possibly Somalia or Ethiopia, showing also the roundhouses of that country. In its time, great sculptures embellished the building. There were over 100 limestone sphinxes, 22 granite sphinxes, 40 limestone statues of Hatshepsut, and 28 granite statues of Hatshepsut. Ramses II of 19th dynasty also built a temple carved out of a hill. The temple of Abu Simbel in Nubia is of an incredible scale. See page 197. The facade is 108 feet wide and contains 4 colossal statues of the pharaoh, each 66 feet high. What is remarkable here is the organizational feat involved. The carved images of Ramesses are so large that each builder/sculptor would be so close to their work that none of them would be able to see the bigger picture as they worked. For this reason, accuracy was critical and not just for the artistic reasons. The building was oriented to the east to catch the first rays of sunlight that illuminated its icons at the end of the 208 feet corridor. Inside the entrance to the temple are statues of the deity Osiris. This led to a smaller hall that led to an inner chamber. Further south, the Kushites of southern Egypt and northern and central Sudan had a very long and ancient history. In their earliest periods, they had a pharaonic culture, much like ancient Egypt, but beginning earlier than that of the Egyptians. 5,000 artifacts were recovered from a series of early pharaonic tombs in Kustal. Other great periods were centered at cities like Kerma, Gebel Barkal, Meroe, and Naka. Kerma contains monuments that were built before 1500 BC. Most impressive are the mighty Defufas, buildings of clay bricks, the largest of which was 150 feet long, 75 feet wide, and a towering 60 feet tall. Its walls were 12 feet thick and were straight and even. The functions of these buildings are somewhat unclear. Some writers see them as warehouses. In support of this view, archaeologists have found various trade and luxury goods, including pottery and jewels, in their vicinity. Other writers claim they were temples, drawing attention to the quartz altar and also columns, and the faience tiles in one of the buildings. They were made of smaller blocks than their Giza counterparts. The pyramids were used for royal burials and were entered by underground stairways on the eastern side. Meroe became the capital of the Kushite Empire from around 590 BC until about 350 AD, a period well attested by monuments. There are, for example, 84 pyramids in this city alone, many built with their own miniature temple. Moreover, there are ruins of a bathhouse sharing affinities with those of the Romans. 2 leading Africanists, Professor Roland Oliver and Brian Fagan, assure us that, even today, the ruins of Meroe make an impressive sight. 6 low hills of iron slag mark the southern and western perimeters of the town, bearing witness to what must surely have been the main industry of its inhabitants, i.e., iron smelting. To the east of the main housing areas are the ruins of a whole series of temples and cemeteries, while the burial pyramids of royal family crown the summit of a low ridge overlooking the site. Only a small part of the town has so far been cleared and excavated. The royal cemetery, some scattered temples, and the so-called royal city, which extends along the banks of the Nile near the main landing stage. Here, the Temple of Amun was found to be 450 feet long, built of brick and sandstone blocks, and forming a series of courts and halls enclosing a central shrine. In Musawarat, there is a very large and curious complex generally called the Great Enclosure. Dated at 220 BC, it has a series of walled enclosures and edifices that surround a central temple, itself built on a raised platform. Encircling the temple is a colonnade, and outside of this is a series of ramps and corridors connecting the different parts of the building. Decorating the structure are elephant motifs. Dr. Davidson, an English Africanist, suggested that the building function as a place to train, and thus tame, African elephants. Other scholars, just as convincingly, see it as a religious center for accommodating pilgrims. The Sudanese city of Naka contains 3 important temples: the Temple of Amun, the Lion Temple, and the Kiosk. They date between 1 AD and 20 AD. Pharaoh Natakami and Queen Amatori built the Temple of Amun and the Lion Temple. The Temple of Amun has a columned hall leading to an inner sanctuary as in Egyptian temples. In addition, there were 12 sculpted rams that lined the avenue to the entrance. The Lion Temple was dedicated to Apedemek, a local deity. It has a typical Egyptian-like pylon with the king and queen depicted as conquerors bashing the heads of their enemies. The depiction of the queen doing the same thing may represent a powerful role for the queen mother in the society, or may even represent matriarchy. Behind the pylon is a one-room structure, a design unique to Kush. Finally, the kiosk is a strange building that seems to have incorporated many cultural influences. There are arches, possibly reflecting Roman influence, and the capitals of the columns show traces of Greek influence. Some writers describe them as pseudo-Corinthian. It is important to note, however, that there is no evidence that the Romans or Greeks built this temple. Many writers have hinted at this possibility, but in the absence of solid evidence, we must conclude that this is a Kushite monument built by Kushites. West Africa. In West Africa, in the Tichit-Walata region of Mauritania, archaeologists found large stone masonry villages that date back to 1100 BC. The villages consisted of roughly circular compounds connected by well-defined streets. Between 1000 and 800 BC, 4 times as many villages flourished, where each village was encircled by a masonry wall over 2 meters high and 1 meter thick. By 250 BC, the foundations of West Africa's oldest cities were established, such as Old Djenné. Kumbi Saleh, the capital of ancient Ghana, flourished from 300 to 1240 AD. Located in modern-day Mauritania, archaeological excavations have revealed much. There were houses almost habitable today, for want of renovation, and several stories high. They had underground rooms, staircases, and connecting halls. Some had 9 rooms. One part of the city alone is estimated to have housed 30,000 people. We can only speculate on the total city population, but it was several times the size of medieval London. There were many other great cities from the Middle Ages that are very much alive today and have preserved some of their ancient buildings, such as Djenné, Timbuktu, see page 376, Gao, Agades, San, Bor, etc. William Winwood Reade, an English historian, saw some of them in the 19th century and commented that in Africa there are thousands of large walled cities resembling those of Europe in the Middle Ages, or of ancient Greece, or of Italy before the supremacy of Rome, encircled by pastures and by arable estates and by farming villages, with their village otora, their municipal government, their agora or forum, their fortified houses, and their feuds and street frays of Capulet and Montague. One such example of a medieval metropolis is the city of Djenné in modern-day Mali. Djenné's houses have been widely praised for aesthetic and hand-sculpted outer walls and terracotta appearance. They are typically of 2 stories, with battlements along the summits of the terraces. On the terraces were the latrines, which, according to Major Felix Dubois, a pioneering authority, had perfectly constructed drainage. The interiors had a system of baked pipes to carry away household water. The exterior facade looks much like the facades of the temples attached to the Kushite pyramids, or of those of Karnak and Luxor temples, a fact noticed by both Major Dubois and Professor Diop. Another Nile Valley feature is the obelisks. They are not freestanding, but are built into the house walls of the most substantial houses. Dubois also notes that the summits of their dwellings are ornamented by those triangular battlements which may be seen on the palaces of Ramses Mahound. Like Djenné, the houses in Timbuktu are typically of 2 stories. They were made of regular sun-dried bricks of various shapes, flat, long, and rounded. They were set with mortar and then covered with rough casing. According to Major Dubois, the houses defy the heaviest tornadoes of rain and wind and can last for centuries. The use of clay bricks was dictated by factors such as the availability of alternative building materials. As noted by Dr. Finch, the Western Sudan, i.e. West Africa, unlike the Nile Valley or Zimbabwe, is not blessed with abundant building stones such as granite or limestone. Thus, the building material of choice is a particular clay native to the Sudan that allows the fashioning of bricks. The roofs of the houses were built by constructing a grid of wooden planks on top of the upper walls. The ends of the planks projected through the walls and could be seen from the outside of the building. A layer of clay was laid over the wooden grid that became the roof. There are mosques still in use today that date back to the glory days of the Mali and Songhai empires. Timbuktu had a famous university. The Sankor Mosque and the 2 other important temples, Djinguereber and the Sidi Heya. The minarets of all 3 14th century monuments dominate the Timbuktu skyline. See page 379. The Djinguereber Mosque is a 9-aisle building. It was made of round bricks and stone rubble with clay rendering. It has a flat roof sanctuary supported by arcades of mud piers. The minaret is 16 meters high and has an internal staircase. Mansa Musa built this monument in around 1326. The Grand Mosque of Djenné, described as the largest adobe, i.e. clay building in the world, was first raised in 1204 as a mosque. It is built on a square plan where each side is 56 meters in length. It has 3 towers on one side, each with projecting wooden buttresses, as it's typical of West African monuments from that period. The Grand Mosque of San is particularly noteworthy, as is the Mausoleum of Askia the Great, a weird 16th century edifice that resembles a step pyramid. There are many other pyramidal structures in the Lake Debo region. A French archaeologist described them as follows. These are massive clusters of clay and stone, in the form of truncated pyramids, with a terracotta summit of red brick. All of them date from the same period and were built for the same purpose. They rise 15 to 18 meters high on a base of 200 square meters. Thousands of these tumuli have been found across West Africa. Nearly 7,000 were discovered in northwest Senegal, alone spread over nearly 1,500 sites. They were probably built between 1000 and 1300 AD. Recent excavations at Gao, carried out by Tim Insole of Cambridge University, revealed some intriguing information. One of the finds is well worth meditating on. It is entitled Fragments of Alabaster Window Surrounds and a Piece of Pink Window Glass, Gao, 10th and 14th century. Ethiopia. In Ethiopia, there are monuments dating back at least 2,500 years. The Temple of Almaka in Hea was probably built before the 5th century BC. It is a 2-story structure made of dry stone masonry built on a podium. The blocks were precisely cut and up to 3 meters long. The temple has a frieze of ibex facing the front. Also on the site is a line of huge square pillars. These monoliths were the remains of a second building. The city of Axum has a series of 7 giant stelae that date from perhaps 300 BC to 300 AD. They have details carved into them that represent windows and doorways of several stories. The largest obelisk, now fallen, is in fact the largest monolith ever made anywhere in the world. It is 108 feet long, weighs a staggering 500 tons, and represents a 13-story building. See page 457. The largest standing obelisk is 75 feet tall and represents a 9-story building. These monolithic towers may have been placed to mark the sites of royal burials. Their sizes and weight is worth pondering over when it is noted that even modern technology would be taxed by the technological problem of moving and erecting such sizable structures. 2 modern scholars have discussed the problem of moving a 200-ton block, which, it must be noted, is less than half the weight of a fallen monolith. Such loads simply cannot be hoisted by the typical tower and hydraulic cranes that we are familiar with from building sites in our cities. These cranes, which are pieces of advanced technology, can generally pick a maximum load of 20 tons. Loads exceeding 50 tons require special cranes. Furthermore, there are a few cranes in the world today that would be capable of picking 200-ton blocks. In the United States, there are presently only 2 land-based cranes of the counterweight and boom type able to handle loads in the 200-ton range. To get this problem into perspective, it is helpful to realize that a block of 200 tons represents a load roughly equivalent to 300 family-sized automobiles. Axum contains the Cathedral of St. Mary of Zion, one of the world's oldest Christian cathedrals. Dating to the 4th century, this monument was later rebuilt in later medieval times. In the 12th and 13th centuries, Roha became the new city of Ethiopians. Conceived as a New Jerusalem by its founder, Emperor Lalibela, 1150 to 1230, it contains 11 churches, all carved out of the rock of the mountains by hammer and chisel. All the temples were carved to the depth of 11 meters or so below ground level. The largest is the house, or church, of the Redeemer, a staggering 33.7 meters long, 23.7 meters wide, and 11.5 meters deep. It is entirely surrounded by a forest of columns, all carved and sculpted. It is one of the 4 churches that give the illusion of being freestanding in Roha, also called Lalibela, connected only by their bases to the rock from which they were hewn. The other 7 are almost hidden away. An Ethiopian tourist manual informs us that, physically prized from the rock on which they stand, these towering edifices seem superhuman in scale, workmanship, and concept. Some lie almost completely hidden in deep trenches, whilst others stand in open quarried caves. A complex and bewildering labyrinth of tunnels and narrow passageways, with offset crypts, grottos, and galleries, connects them all. Throughout this mysterious and wonderful settlement, priests and deacons go about their timeless business. The House of Mary is another of the freestanding churches. See page 465. The emperor considered it one of his favorites, and the royal family used it to hold mass. It is 15 meters long, 11 meters wide, and 10 meters deep. In its courtyard is a deep square baptismal pool. Perhaps the most celebrated of the Lalibela churches is the House of St. George. From the top of the monument, looking downwards, the church is in the shape of a concentric cross. It is more than 12 meters deep, and its outer wall seems to indicate 4 stories. Like the Temple of Amaka, the church was built on a podium. The bottom rows of windows are similar in design to those seen on the old Axum monoliths. Other windows have pointed arches. Internally, there is a dome over the sanctuary. The architects of Lalibela seem to have absorbed or developed a wide range of styles. The House of Golgotha has pointed arch windows with a tendril-like tracery topped by a cross, similar to the Maltese cross. The House of Abba, Libanos, has plain pointed arch windows but also cross-shaped openings. The House of Maskell has Romanesque arches and windows of twinned crosses. The House of Mary has swastika-shaped windows. Lalibela is not the only place to have such wonders. See also page 49. Peter Garlake, author of Early Art and Architecture of Africa, reports research that was conducted in the region in the early 1970s when startling numbers of churches built in caves or partially or completely cut from the living rock were revealed not only in Tigray and Lalibela, but as far south as Addis Ababa. Soon at least 1,500 were known. At least as many more probably await revelation to the outside world. A whole realm of architectural history awaits recording, study, and understanding. Southern Africa. In southern Africa, there are at least 600 stone-built ruins in the regions of Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and South Africa. These ruins show today an extraordinary cultural past. Most of them are said to date from the Middle Ages, but some authorities give much earlier dates for their construction. These structures are called Mazimbabwe in Shona, the Bantu language of the builders, and means great houses of stone. João de Barro, a Portuguese writer of the mid-16th century, tells us Zimbabwe, more correctly Zimbabwe, in Shona signifies court. Of the buildings themselves, Professor Diop, cited earlier, informs us that they are almost cyclopean structures with walls several meters thick, 5 at the base, 3 at the top, and 9 meters in height. Edifices of all types are to be found there, from the royal palace, the temple, and the military fortification to the private villa of notable. The walls are of granite masonry. The Great Zimbabwe was the largest of these ruins. It consists of 12 clusters of buildings spread over 3 square miles. Its outer walls were made from 100,000 tons of granite bricks. In the 14th century, the city housed 18,000 people, comparable in size of that of London of the same period. The buildings housed warehouses and shrines. Its industries included 4,000 gold mines, iron smelting, copper and bronze manufacture, and an ivory trade with the Swahili on the East African coast. Among the products imported were stoneware and green glazed dishes from China, colored glass from the Near East, and glazed and painted bowls from Persia. The walls of the central enclosure, popularly known as the temple, reach 35 feet in height and 17 feet thick in places. They form an irregular ellipse with a maximum diameter of 292 feet and a circumference of 830 feet. The bricks are fashioned and arranged to hold together in regular courses without the use of mortar. The floors are of crushed granite and contain drains. One of the earliest visitors to the site, J. Theodore Bent, commented that, as a specimen of the dry builder's art, it is without a parallel. The tops of some walls have ornamental patterns, of which chevron and dentil are the most common. For over 250 feet of its length, the chevron pattern ornaments the outer wall and is perfectly level. On the summit of the wall above the chevron work stood a series of granite and soapstone monoliths, and also a double row of small granite towers. Some of the other ruins show check, sloping block, and herringbone patterns. The north entrance has steps that curve inwards in a semicircular fashion. This leads immediately inside the Great Parallel Passage, a distance of 220 feet. Though succumbed to the passage of time, cottages once stood within the outside of these walls for an area of 3 square miles. They were circular and thatched. Moreover, they had walls 12 to 18 inches thick and made of daga, a clay and gravel mixture. According to Peter Garlake, a former senior inspector of monuments, the cottages exhibited considerable technical proficiency that achieved almost sculptural effects. He continues, The Daga structures in the ruins were in fact structural accomplishments of the same order as the masonry walls. Yet fundamentally, they are only developments and refinements of traditions that were almost ubiquitous in the cultures of the area and time. Both reflect a concern for appearance, ostentation, even luxury, achieved regardless of the cost in labor or material. Daga was also used to make steps, fireplaces, chairs, bedsteads, and tables, all to a high level of smooth glazed finish. It was used to coat floors, again a fine finish. Dr. Finch notes that this must have had a dazzling aesthetic effect. The cottages were richly decorated and carved wooden beams and painted walls. Among the typical designs were paintings of animals, birds, people, and black and white squares. Some cottages had wooden doors, beautifully carved from select timbers. One authority informs us that very few of these elaborate door panels survive, but some can still be found in very remote regions of the country. Perhaps the most well-known part of the ruined complex is the conical tower. The parallel passage leads on to this curious edifice. It is 18 feet in diameter at the base and 30 feet high, though once higher. Next to the tower is a much smaller cone structure. The conical tower may symbolize a mound of grain and therefore reinforce the role of the king as a provider for the people. On a hill 350 feet above and overlooking the temple is a castle, generally known as the Acropolis. It has very thick walls, massive conical turrets, narrow entrances, and twisting passageways. The widths of the entrances vary from half a meter to just over a meter. The widths of the walls vary from 12 to 14 feet at the top to 19 to 22 feet thick at the base. The site may well have been chosen for security reasons, giving a panoramic view of the city and the surroundings. What is interesting here is that the hill contains huge stone boulders. The builders incorporated the boulders into the walls rather than clearing them. The Eastern Temple was another part of the complex. It was here that the famous soapstone bird sculptures were found. These birds were typically 14 inches long and stood at the top of 3 feet long columns. By the 13th century, or perhaps earlier, an empire was established in the region of Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and South Africa. In later times, it became known as Munhumatapa. Its rulers controlled the trade with the East African coastal cities. Furthermore, they controlled the all-important gold mines. Great Zimbabwe functioned as its cultural capital until about 1550, but then it was gradually abandoned. Hundreds of other stone-built structures associated with this and a successor empire exist in the region. The most notable of these courts were at Kami, see page 528, Nailtail, and Dalo Dalo. Like Great Zimbabwe, they have walls of dressed blocks, but they also have platforms and terraces where the cottages were built. In the nail-tail walls, there are small towers capping the outer wall that, again, may represent a pile of grain. These walls are regularly coursed and contain decorations of chevron, check, herringbone, dark stone, and paneled herringbone patterns. Patterns of various motifs became a regular feature of walls in this area. Of the domestic goods at the courts, archaeology at Kami has revealed interesting data. At the Kami ruins, late 16th or early 17th century Wanli blue and white porcelain, Portuguese, German, and North African glazed stonewares and earthenwares, and fragments of Iberian silverware have been found. East African coast. The east coast, from Somalia to Mozambique, has ruins of well over 50 towns and cities. They flourished from the 9th to the 16th centuries due to their role in the Indian Ocean trade. One of these cities was Kilwa, a former seaport on the coast of Tanzania. In the 14th century, Kilwa was a very fine place. One visitor described it as one of the most beautiful and well-constructed cities in the world. Today, says a modern authority, only a shabby village stands there. Yet beyond the village can still be found the walls and towers of ruined palaces and large houses and mosques, which is what the Muslims call their churches. A great palace, the Hunsuni Kubwa, has been dug out of the bushes that covered it for hundreds of years. It is a strange and beautiful ruin on a cliff over the Indian Ocean. Many other ruins stand nearby, but the strangest thing about the Kiwa and the other towns nearby is that there is little to be found about them in the newer history books. Even when the cities are described, they are said to not be of African, but the work of people from Arabia and Persia. History books saying this are out of date and they are wrong. The other cities included the likes of Sinna, Zanzibar, Lamu, Mombasa, Gedi, and Mogadishu. Their mosques were, as grand as the medieval cathedrals of Europe. The city of Lamu, see also page 470, was apparently as sophisticated as medieval Venice. Tradition has it that Lamu, the best preserved of the Swahili cities, was founded in 699 AD. Near its harbor are a number of splendid mansions now deserted. They have reception rooms whose walls were tiered decorated niches. Also of interest is a fluted pillar tomb that may date back to the 15th century period. The city has over 20 mosques, all whitewashed, and also a few palaces. In Kilwa, the ruined mosque was once the largest of the Swahili temples. It was founded in the 10th or 11th centuries AD, but it was enlarged in the 13th and 15th centuries. The North Prayer Hall was built first. It had a massive stone and concrete roof built on the wooden rafters. Supporting the roof were a series of 9 wooden pillars of polygonal shape. The domed extension to the south was built later. Between 1421 and 1430, it was rebuilt during the time of Suleiman ibn Muhammad al-Malik al-Adil. Its roof is complicated construction and has a barrel vaults and domes over alternate bays. The interior has a forest of composite octagonal columns of rubble and cut stone, set in mortar. To the south of the mosque is a high wall that encloses an area for ablutions. It has water tanks, a well, and stone slabs, on which feet were washed and dried. In total, it was an admirable structure. One early Portuguese visitor compared its dome ceiling to that of the Great Mosque of Cordova in Spain. There are other buildings of historical interest in Kilwa. Located east of the Husuni Kubwa is the Husuni Ndogo, a contemporaneous building raised by al-Malik al-Mansur. The structure has a massive wall enclosing a rectangular plan and covers an acre. At intervals along the walls and at the corners are solid towers. They are polygonal in shape but circular at the base. The function of this great edifice is presently unknown, but it may have been a mosque or even a market. South and west of the great mosque lay the graveyard. This leads to a small domed 15th century temple. It is the best preserved and ornamented of the old structures. The customary vaults and domes ornament its roof, but an octagonal pillar, a most curious feature, surmounts the central dome. Islamic ware consisting of small bowls was set into the ceilings of the vaults. Above the mihrab were recesses for tiles and bowls. The eastern side of the building has a room that may have functioned as a Quran school. Marco Polo describes Zanzibar in the latter 13th century. Mentioning their trade in ivory, he portrayed Zanzibar as a port that attracted many merchant ships. Of Zanzibari architecture, Dr. Ele, author of the excellent African Architecture, Evolution, and Transformation, makes the following observations. The islands of Zanzibar and Pemba have some of the best preserved classic architecture of the Swahili Middle Ages and are distinguished by the Art Deco that garnishes the walls and the notches of the buildings. As in Lamu, Kenya, the houses in Zanzibar were built of brick. They are self-contained 1- or 2-story buildings with gardens, courtyards, servant quarters, walls of coral, and a prioritized degree of privacy in the location of the master bedrooms, the wives' rooms, and the parlor or living space. In most cases, the verandas are well decorated with plasterwork, and careful attention is given to the openings, which are decorated along the top and down the sides of the pilasters. Gedi, near the coast of Kenya, is another ghost town. Its ruins, dating from the 14th or 15th centuries, some say earlier, include the city walls, the palace, see page 472, private houses, the Great Mosque, 7 smaller mosques, and 3 pillar tombs. The walls are 9 feet high and had at least 3 gates. Approaching the mosque was a washing pool for the believers to perform ablutions. It had a purifier made of limestone for recycling water. The houses had roofs of coral tiles covered in lime, walls of mortar and coral rag, and finely cut doorways of coral. The early houses were of 1 story. They had a court leading to the main room, and behind that was the private quarter. Also there were smaller adjoining rooms, such as a bathroom, the toilet, bedroom, kitchen, and storeroom. Later houses, from the 15th or 16th centuries, had upper floors. The royal palace had a layout similar to the large clusters of these houses, but with the addition of reception hall. The palace contains evidence of piped water controlled by taps, bathrooms, and indoor toilets. Finally, a part of this 3-gated city had streets laid out on the north-south, east-west grid. In summary, Africa has a long and varied history of human settlement. wrote Dr. Thomas Blair, an expert on architecture and planning. Its cities reach back to the thresholds of man's urban experience when the dominance of activities at sacred temples, armed camps, palaces, marketplaces, and caravanserai drew neighboring peoples into complex productive systems. From the 9th century expansion of inland and ocean trade to the 15th century, long before the penetration of European slavers, factors and conquistadors, the port cities, market centers, and city-states of powerful kingdoms enclosed large, densely populated permanent settlements within their boundaries. Large mining centers and stone-building civilizations prospered in the southern tier of Mapungubwe, Transvaal, Zimbabwe, and Monomotapa, southern Rhodesia, and Mozambique. North to the Lunda-Luba settlements and beyond, they flourished in the kingdoms of the Rift Valley in East Africa, and westward to the empires of Mali, Songhai, Kainom, Ghana, and Congo-Angola states. Administrative and trade centers of Sudanic kingdoms were located in capital cities like Segwe and Gao, Timbuktu, Ouagadougou, Kumasi, and Kano were known for their influence and power. Seaport towns grew along the East African coast at Mogadishu, Brava, Malindi, Mombasa, Pemba, Zanzibar, Kilwa, Kilimane, and Sofala. In West Africa, the cities of Yoruba kingdoms rose to prominence as rulers expanded their control over trade routes. The ruler's palace and the marketplace dominated the central areas of well-planned cities like Ife, Elisha, and Ikiti. In the old quarters nearby the houses of the guilds, traders and important families nestled between the major roads radiating to the neighboring towns. Newly settled areas were laid out in a rectilinear pattern. The populace lived in compounds, each of which had a large house set in a square-shaped space bounded by a high wall. Some were more than half-acre in size and provided living space for a large family and kinsmen. Groups of compounds were administered by elders, and together they formed the basis of an urban council responsible to the princely authority.